I'm really excited and happy to be here tonight talking about a very relevant conversation. I'll let everybody know a little bit about Canadian Women in Sport if you're unfamiliar. We've been around for almost 40 years now. We were previously the Canadian Association for the Advancement of Women in Sport and Physical Activity, and we decided this year that was too long, so now we're just Canadian Women in Sport. But our mandate has stayed the same. So we work at the systems level, advancing gender equity in sport. So we partner with government bodies, national sport organizations, provincial sport organizations, and phenomenal groups like Archery Canada to be able to share this information and influence policies and practices so that girls can stay in sport and get all of those positive benefits out of it in the long run of their lives. I won't continue to talk about us, however, and I will jump into introducing the panelists. But just before that, I'd like to do a quick land acknowledgement. So we would like to acknowledge that the land, this is in reference to where I am, Toronto, by the way. So I'd like to acknowledge that the land we're on today is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse nations, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 and the Mississaugas of the Credit. I'd like to acknowledge the underrepresentation of Indigenous women and girls in sport in this country and the multiple barriers that they face to participation at all levels. It's our intention to continue to build relationships that will allow us to better address the gap through our work. So on our website at womeninsport.ca, you can find more information about how we strive to do that work each day. So that being said, I'd love to do a really quick overview of who we have chatting with us today. You'll have the opportunity each to say where you are and give a little bit more color commentary to this brief bio and why you're keen to talk about this today. So I'll start with Dr. Vicki Harber. She is the Professor Emeritus from the University of Alberta in the Faculty of Kinesiology, Sport and Recreation. In addition to the number of hats she wears, she is also a Sport for Life long-term development advisor. Next with us, we have Kathleen Millar. She's the former Executive Director of Archery Canada, a chartered professional coach, longtime archery coach, and owner of the South Nation Archery Club. And finally, last but not least, we have another Vanessa on the line, Vanessa Lee, who's a former national team recurve archer, a world archery correspondent, a physiotherapist, and a coach. So a number of different perspectives you'll be able to share with us tonight. So I'll pass it over to Vicki first to share where you are in Canada right now and just provide a little bit more context to what you do in sport.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa, and it's an absolute pleasure. I'm dialing in from Edmonton, Alberta, Treaty 6, which again, acknowledging land and territory. Again, I would echo Vanessa's opening remarks around the inclusion aspect. My own work I've been retired from the University of Alberta for a number of years, but I've been with Sport for Life for about a dozen now. And my academic life has been completely immersed around the female athlete. So this is an area which is absolutely near and dear to my heart for many reasons. I was with 2 Olympic rowing teams. So I have a lot of sort of empathy and desire to support in that area around sport and providing those advantages and benefits beyond the actual participation in sport.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much, Vicki. Kathleen, would you like to go next?
So good evening. I'd like to acknowledge that South Nation Archery is located on the traditional lands of the Kayanakaka of the Hawan-Desai Confederacy, and that we recognize the enduring presence of the First Peoples here in Eastern Ontario. So I live south of Ottawa, and I moved into this area in the early 1980s to be technical director for Archery Canada the first time through. Like Vanessa Lee, I studied at the University of Toronto in physical and health education, but while I was there, I coached the women-only intercollegiate archery team. Then I moved on to the real world and asked where all the women are, because when I started in high school, it was only for girls too. So it was a little bit of a journey for me, identifying, once I was staff, identifying existing female role models to put in our promotions and to put in teaching aids, which are probably all archived now, but in those days to recognize our world champions. And on the coaching side, I've coached 3 world champions and a couple of silver medalists. All of the world champions are men, but the other medalists have been women. So in compound recurve and barebow, so I think I have a fairly good handle on working with men and women, boys and girls. We start people here at our club at the age of 7, and my oldest student was 94.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing, Kathleen. Vanessa.
Yeah, this whole thing is throwing me off because you have the same name as me, but I'll respond to either Vanessa 1 or Vanessa 2. I just wanted to say that I personally don't feel like I'm deserving yet of the title coach. You know, I think that's something that's earned and something that someone like Kathleen has really worked her whole life to achieve. I've dabbled in, you know, providing some information here and there, but it'll take me years before I feel comfortable enough to call myself that. I did compete under the Canadian team for several years, from around 2009 to 2016 or 15. And yeah, I will later on get into how I got into the sport. I shot recurve, I shot at high levels, and now I'm shooting compound, and I'm anything but high level compound. So looking forward to our discussion.
Great, thank you. Just to round out the intros, as you would all know, I'm with Canadian Women in Sport on the programs team, which I joined in August of 2019. My background is not in archery, it's in basketball, which is, you know, a team environment and also a sport similarly to archery, however, which is predominantly participated by men, but it's on the rise by girls and women in Canada. So I can empathize with a lot of the issues that we're going to dive into today, but I also had a lot to learn going into this conversation. But again, I'll just remind everybody that you can populate the Q&A with your own questions as we come along here, and they'll be addressed at the end of the conversation. So to kick this off, thank you, Kyla, for providing those stats around, you know, the current landscape of archery participation and coaching in Canada. I'll start with a question for Vicki. So more generally speaking, based on current reports that look at gendered data in sport in Canada, we know that 51% of girls in Canada are not participating in any kind of sport or physical activity. Before we dive into the archery-specific barriers, Vicki, can you explain some of the prominent factors that lead girls to leave sport?
Yeah, there's 4 basic reasons why kids will leave sport. And I can draw out what the unique features are around girls, but those 4 global reasons are: sport causes injury, it takes up too much time, costs too much money, and it's not fun. So those then play a role in why any child or youth would leave sport, regardless of the sport. When it comes to some of the unique reasons or what leads girls to leave, when sort of using those 4 factors around injuries. Girls get unique injuries. These might not apply to archery, but higher rates of injuries to a knee ligament, the anterior cruciate ligament. And Vanessa, you being in basketball, where there's a lot of pivoting, decelerations, and jumping, that would be the type of sport, less so in archery. And then concussions. Again, less likely, I imagine, within archery, but concussions can happen in some of the oddest places with the oddest kinds of collisions. But those are unique because girls and women will have a higher rate of those injuries compared to their male counterparts. The other one that, you know, the time and money is not necessarily gender specific, but when it comes to lack of fun, that's a bit of an umbrella term, that our sport environments become quite unwelcoming for many girls, that they don't feel accepted, they don't feel valued for the skills and offerings that they are bringing. They might not feel good enough. They don't feel that they're being, some of the, not just technical skills, but some of the social skills are lacking. And around that lack of acceptance and lack of a place of belonging, I would say is, again, an embellishment of when it becomes no fun. You know, if you can imagine any of us stepping into a room where we're either being ignored, shunned, that we're not allowed to progress and learn, I dare say that if we didn't have to be there, we wouldn't want to be there. And then the other piece, which I think we've alluded to as well, is lack of role models. And if I can also attach lack of mentors, because a role model is what we see out there. Yet there's no obligation for the role model to come in and say, can I give you a hand? Do you have some questions that you would like to ask? What kinds of things are you curious about? Someone to give you a boost up when you're having a tricky time. So attached to that role models, do we actually see girls and women represented in those places as participants, as coaches, as leaders, as administrators? That expression around we can't be what we can't see. So it's important that we create those environments, and then that mentorship as well, that on equal footing, those of us that have been around for a little while and have those experiences, good, bad, or otherwise, how can we be generous and afford those learning opportunities for the next generation of girls and women coming forward? So that's sort of just to get things started and whet people's appetite to think about things.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was a really, we went broad, but also specific in that answer. And I appreciate the distinction you made between a role model and a mentor. And that's actually something I wrote down for myself to remember, because I think we use those terms interchangeably when they have a different relationship to the athlete in the community. So building off of that, Kathleen, you have a really wide range of experience from grassroots up to, like you said, coaching, you know, championship athletes. And so I'm sure if you haven't seen it all, then you've seen a lot. Can you build on Vicki's response with some barriers specific to archery that girls face that lead them to walk away?
So over the years, I've felt that there were certain stars that had to line up if someone was going to stay in the sport, whether that would be for the elite level or to stay recreational. The first one of those is parental and family support and acceptance. The sport itself, with its history of hunting and war, you wouldn't say that this should be an issue, but both with fathers and mothers, I have found there's sometimes a reluctance to accept a young person's interest in a weapon sport, and some parents will make the assumption that girls in particular are not really supposed to be involved with a sport like archery. And that goes all the way up the line. I mean, I worked with somebody who's been at the international level for this country for years, successful, mother of two. And when we talked, she said her mother doesn't like her being involved with archery because it's not elite enough. She should have done equestrian. So that network is, when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's right at the bottom with safety and security. So if it doesn't come from the parents that they're going to do all the running around when somebody's young, especially out here, we're rural, if the parents aren't accepting and really keen, then they're not going to be driven to where they have to go and train, for instance, or to meet with other people. So that's one of the things that happens in, especially being archery, though I'm sure most of you are in urban areas. The majority of what takes place with archery in Canada is rural. So transportation becomes quite a barrier. And then the parental expectations for girls leads to what I call a guilt complex. That if the priorities are not put in school, career, then sport, social, then they're spending, as Vicki said, they're spending too much time in sport. They're supposed to be doing serious things. And in archery, there's very limited opportunity to become a professional. So you can't tell your folks that, you know, if I really enjoy this and I really work hard, you know, I can make a living doing this, right? No. So that doesn't go over too well. Then within a family unit, because archery, though we train together, is kind of an individual leaning personality subset. If there are siblings involved, there can be jealousy. And that's another deterrent that takes the fun out of whatever you've put into your club unit or your team, anything within the family unit. So that's number one. Financial support, whether that's internal or external, in this country has huge gaps between the club, the province, and the national level, based on performance, based on potential performance. But we're talking about the elite. Where most people are running into trouble financially is equipment. Now, I'm going to talk about equipment separately as a complete barrier to women based on the manufacturing industry, which is huge, but I'll get to that in a minute. Then the third star is natural talent. So of course, someone who has a certain amount of ability with a little bit of training and is good at it, that really sets their house on fire. They don't need to do it with anybody else. So it's a strength in some respects, but it is a very hard sport on your self-esteem. So if you're already facing these other barriers and you run into a problem with your archery, you have to have the support network that I mentioned before to make sure that you have a chance to excel with your natural talent. So it's interrelated. Then we have drive and commitment. And that kind of goes back to the guilt, you know, priority thing. I really would rather have somebody who was extremely motivated and committed to train, sort of like, you know, Christine Sinclair with a bow, or, you know, Michelle Obama with a bow, than just go on raw natural talent, because in the long run, that's what's going to help them. So when you find somebody like that, the last thing you want is to put that young woman or girl into a testosterone fueled environment, which some clubs in Canada can unfortunately become. And then the last one is fearlessness, and that comes out of self-actualization. So the people that really stay with the sport and keep going are comfortable within their skin. They're fearless. Someone says, no, we got to do it this way, and that's the only way it goes. They're never going to be going ahead in the sport because it's so individual with your equipment. So those 5 stars have to line up if they're even going to stay and be comfortable at the grassroots level. But more importantly, for some people that may be listening in, how you develop them from the club level and move on, should that be what they want to do. And it comes back, if you have someone walk in your club and you have nothing in the way of instructional equipment that will suit them to get going, you're making some pretty obvious assumptions and biases on the person who's going to walk in that door. And you've just turned off a potential club member, provincial team member, international competitive performer. So that's some of the barriers there. I'm not sure how much time I have for this, but I would like to really introduce to the people who are not involved with archery very much, or who don't have their own archery shop. One of the biggest barriers to children, and girls in particular, but women as well, is the bias within the equipment industry. That has been a tough fight for me for almost 40 years. Where is the equipment for the women? Where is the equipment for the girls? Where is the top quality, efficient bows, the really lightweight arrows? Where is it? You talk a good game, but when push comes to shove, I just had a guy walk in, he wants to get his daughter-in-law a bow for Christmas, and she wants to shoot a compound bow. And the mass weight, you might as well need a sky hook. And there's only a couple of bows on the market that you can drop the bow weight down to so a woman could start at a comfortable weight and learn the form properly, and then push the weight if she wanted to bow hunt or if she wanted to shoot 50 meters. There aren't that many bows on the market that you can do that with. And the price can be prohibitive when you get into top quality stuff. And we're not talking about big box stores or mass merchant stores. We're talking about people who need individual materials and goods and services, and it's just not there like it is for men. So I'd like to leave you with that thought, and I'm sure Vanessa Lee is going to pick up on this some more.
Yeah, thank you for that. You definitely touched on a number of areas that influence the individual, like home life and the support there, all the way to accessibility of equipment. And particularly, I think when you're talking about the assumptions made by a program leader or a coach when these things aren't accessible, and how that can really, you know, be a roadblock for someone who's just starting out in the sport. Vanessa, as a former athlete, can you provide some color commentary based on, you know, those scenarios or anything else that you think is relevant that you experienced or you witnessed in your teammates and training partners that prevented them? And then I'd love to double back with the positives of if you can remember any defining moments that contributed to you staying in archery and, you know, making it as far as you have and still being involved in the sport now.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I kind of missed this in the intro, but first I wanted to say thank you to everybody who's joining in. I just took a quick look at the attendee list, and I see a lot of men too, which is awesome because we all need to support each other, but I also see really young female archers. So I want us to say kudos to you. No one's gonna do it for you. You're taking this into your own hands and learning for yourselves, so well done. If it's all right, I just wanna go over how I got into the sport, you know, my experiences, what I noticed my teammates experiencing as well. And hopefully I'll touch upon a lot of the questions that you had.
Yes, please do.
I definitely see what Dr. Vicki Harber was talking about with a lot of the barriers to sport. Personally, I felt a lot of those as well. And I 100% agree with Kathy as well. So let's take it back to 2004, Athens Olympic Games. I was actually in South Korea at the time, visiting my family and friends for the first time. And instead of going out sightseeing, there was a huge typhoon outside. My cousins and I were huddled inside this small little cabin on a tiny little island, and we were watching the Olympics because it was the only thing on TV. It was China versus Korea, and my family's Korean, so I had a little bit of a bias, and it was the team gold medal match. It came down to the last two arrows. Park Sung-hyun was amazing. She always wore her hat really low, sunglasses. She was very stoic. All she had to do was shoot in the yellow, and they were guaranteed gold. She steps up to the line with her second last arrow, shoots, and it's an 8, right outside the yellow. And the Chinese team starts dancing. So I'm getting pissed. She has one more arrow. She loads it in just like she did any other shot. She draws, lets go. It's like slow motion, and it goes straight into the 10, exactly what she needed to win. So it's from that moment, I knew that I wanted to do archery. Not because she just shot a great shot. It was because she was so damn cool, so calm under pressure, and I just wanted to be exactly like her. On top of that, my 2 male cousins were sitting behind me going, oh my God, that looks so easy, I could do that. And I wanted to prove to them, these annoying little brats, that I was gonna be better than they ever could be. So I stopped spending all the money my parents gave me. I decided to buy a bow once I got home, and that's how I started. So like Kathy mentioned, I was very fortunate to have very supportive parents, financially, moral support. They sent me to tournaments that I needed to go to, bought me the equipment that I had, and not everybody could have been as fortunate as I was. I had teammates who had to support themselves through university, get multiple jobs, and also buy their own equipment that wasn't tailored to them, equipment that was tailored for men. I ended up making the national team several years later, but there were a lot of things that I was learning along the way, having made the national team. And actually, Kathy might remember this. It was my first ever international tournament. It was in Taiwan for the World University Championships, and I shot horribly. My qualification landed me in 33rd place, and I turned and looked at her, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on. She sat me down, and she said, is there anything that's going on? Like, are you feeling all right? And I said, you know what? Sorry, guys in the room, but I just started my period this morning. And she goes, well, that could make a difference. And for me, this was the first time ever that I even considered this to be something that would affect me as an archer. It was just something I accepted as being a female, but no one ever mentioned to me that, you know, maybe your menstrual cycle has something to do with performance and we need to take that into account. So thank you, Kathy, for that. Still stuck with me many, many years late, 12 years later. So I continued to compete. Unfortunately, like Vicki mentioned, I didn't have many role models or mentors in Canadian archery. We had 2 very strong females nationally. Internationally, they were doing okay, but I wouldn't say they were my mentors per se. My mentors were Clara Hughes, Haley Wickenheiser, women in other sports in Canada, or Park Sung-hyun of Korea. What's really interesting is that if you looked across the down in Colombia, actually, I just noticed that she's joined here. None other than Sarah Lopez, 5 times World Cup final champion. She's here right now. She was actually an incredible mentor, not just a role model, but a mentor to a lot of the archers in her country. And you've seen the growth over the years and how dominant they've become. I don't think we have that in Canada. We have excellent archers, but if we had that mentorship for all the archers coming up, that would be huge. One person who's really stepping up the game is Virginie right now. She has an excellent attitude and is really offering a lot of mentorship to other younger archers, and I feel like she has a great attitude. But we talked about this. We didn't have mentors in Canadian archery. So eventually life happened. I felt like I had shot enough. One of the things that Vicki also mentioned, I wasn't having fun anymore. I decided, I need to start making money. So I stopped shooting. I pursued my career in physiotherapy. I didn't feel like I could dedicate all my time and work to the sport that I wanted to. So it was all or nothing. And I decided to go with my career because that was the real option I had. I didn't have an option to make it professionally and make money. So now that I'm shooting compound, again, I want to touch upon what Kathy said. I searched high and low for a release that's going to fit my hand because gosh, my hand was like this. And that is not a relaxed release hand, is it? That is claw of death. I searched high and low and I'd still have to say the release that I have isn't right for my hand. So thank you for touching upon that. That's a huge, huge barrier to women in sport right now. I feel like through my journey of archery from 2004 till now, I've learned a lot. Thank goodness I've had many important women along the way, like Kathy Joan McDonald has been, she's everything in Canadian archery, you know? And yeah, people like Sean Riggs, who also really gave me a huge boost at my first World Championships when I was so scared my knees were knocking. A lot of people who recognized needs of young women in Canada and helped me along the way. So thank you. That's basically all I have to say.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking us along that timeline. I appreciated the highs and the lows and kind of your origin story in the Athens Olympics. That's very, very special. So for our next question, I know we talked a lot about the barriers and some of the deterrents, but Kathleen and Vicki, if you were able to start to veer this conversation into, you know, those tangible actions and tips that coaches can take to retain those girls and to connect with them and create a sense of social belonging, that would be great. So Kathleen, if you could actually start us off.
So I've always had the philosophy of a holistic coach. So it's a person who shoots a bow. And when we look at young women, we have to analyze, and older women too, because I find the success rate's higher when you have kind of more than one. So a mom-daughter kind of thing is really where you can head into that direction. But a person who shoots a bow. So that means you tailor all of your attention to what that individual needs at that point in time. Archery allows you, whereas maybe some sports don't, to give that individual attention to someone where they're having their issue, a release that doesn't work, training that doesn't work, in things that are in their world. Right now, almost every class that I teach, I start by asking all the kids how they're managing with this new version of school with COVID-19, because that pressure is going to show. You know, here's a chance you can come in, we'll look after you. It's a friendly, safe environment. You can forget about all that junk outside the front door and just have a relaxing good time. And because archery, you must concentrate. If you do a good job, the rest of the world disappears. So the person who shoots a bow is primary. Then the training environment must have respect, no exceptions. Once you have built that environment, then girls and women will stay. Doesn't matter if you've got deer heads mounted on the wall. I know I do, because my husband's a bow hunter. But that doesn't mean that that can be an intimidating environment for young women and girls if you portray it to be welcoming. When we just assume that they're just going to fit in, that's not good enough. That's really not good enough for young women and girls. You got to have a really, really good self-awareness and confidence in order to walk in, like Vanessa said. You got to have a really good self-awareness and self-esteem that, quite frankly, most 13-year-old kids don't have, to get over any of those barriers or that cold shoulder feeling when you walk in. So the environment and the language that's used in the environment can set the tone for women, that they know that when they go to the archery shop, there aren't going to be any snotty remarks. There aren't going to be those little snide little boys in the background. Oh, that looks really easy. You know, somebody like Vanessa is going to squash them like a bug. And that's where you have the ability to introduce to women and girls an environment where they feel they can excel. So within that environment, you have to, as a program coordinator, you have to have flexibility and maybe re-look at your focus. I know I had enough women one year that what they really wanted to do was, before they went and did the grocery shopping on Saturday, they wanted to do archery. Okay, so 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, there I am teaching all these women and girls who are getting their day started with archery and then out into the slogging of the world. Well, the last thing I wanted to do was teach at 8 o'clock in the morning, but that's when it made sense for those women and girls. So you have to be flexible with your programming. I'm certainly not the norm for clubs, right? I control my hours. Most people that have facilities in this country can't control it like that. But you still have to be creative as when you do your programming to look at those hurdles and see how you can get around them. And right now with COVID, it's really a problem. So I've got people who are shooting in 3-meter garages and we're working together on Skype. I mean, we're trying to keep that network together, keep everybody up, keep everybody going. Quite frankly, at times it's pretty exhausting, right? When you're working with a lot of people, but that's really important to keep the connection so we don't lose these girls and women who can't come together in a friendly environment face to face. Then I think what's important that we can do a good job of in archery is we can orchestrate the incremental risk-taking. Whether that is changing the distances, decreasing the target face size, adding a little bit of competition when everybody feels comfortable, inclusive activities that don't center anybody out. Those are things that women can relate to because it's a community. It's a group effort to come together. So why would you design games that are elimination? This is to get people to come together as a unit. So we have it within the structure of archery already to make that safe to increase risk-taking and feel safe if you fail. I tell people here, you're free to fail. This is a safe place to fail. Try. As soon as you add that aspect to your club and your programming, then you can feel the energy in the room change. And you can feel people's shoulders kind of mellow out a bit, and they're not looking over their shoulder to see if anybody's watching them shoot the next shot. So, and the other thing I would say that we have an ability to do as an individual sport is you can ask for feedback, and you can get to know what those people are without becoming in their hip pocket. But for heaven's sakes, listen. Don't just ask and then, well, that was nice. That was nice, dear. Listen and remember what they told you so that the next time they come, you go, oh yeah, so how's Sparky the dog or whatever, and they feel like they are part of a unit, even if they only come in once a week to do an archery class. So that's what I came up with in trying to figure out some of the positives that we can do aside from beating on the manufacturing of archery equipment stuff, but we'll have to 86.
You touch on so many valuable points there, and I particularly like that example of running Saturday morning program and the lengths you had to go to create a connection and find out that information, because it doesn't just appear on your desk. You have to have conversations with people and really dig into how come I only see you once a month? Like, how come you're not here every week? Well, it doesn't actually work with my schedule. It's a big deal for me to show up, and then like you said, following through and setting up a program that works for everyone. Vicki, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I was number of the things you said, Kathleen, just really resonated. And just to build on what Vanessa was saying around that Saturday morning is the idea of meeting them where they are at. And so you met them at a place which worked for them and their schedule at their phase in life. And that nimbleness, that adaptability conveys a direct message that they are important. They are worth your time. And it's in the many different ways in which we can broadcast that message, that the contributions of girls and women to sport are important. And it's a way also of collecting their voice around that feedback mechanism around what it works for them. And Kathleen, you also use that word around community, and that our community of sport is comprised of everyone. And it really reinforces that inclusive, diverse message. And how do we have all participants, regardless of what their roles and responsibilities, if they're support personnel, to again value the sport community, that it's not just the superstars that we're looking for and we're applauding, that we want to make sure they get everywhere, but it's a community that requires the efforts and contributions of many. And girls and women can often be dismissed, sometimes in very obnoxious, very, loud kind of ways. But what's almost more sinister is when they are dismissed in very quiet, simply being ignored. And that to me is almost, like I say, I find that more sinister. And as people who operate in leadership positions within those communities, we need to be eyes wide open and in positions of authority or leadership to quell that, to nip it in the bud. And if conversations and words are being had that are unacceptable to meet that inclusion and diversity, I really do believe it's up to us to stand up and say, no, that's not on, that's just not going to work. So I'm thank you for sort of getting me to kind of vibrate in my own kind of way, Kathleen, and those were awesome points. A couple of ones, again, I am not familiar with your sport at all, so some of the other kind of more big picture ideas is that when you think about, at Sport for Life, we talk about awareness. So how do people become aware of your sport? And then that very next step is, what is their first involvement? What are their first experiences like? And so when you think about that process of recruitment and increasing participant numbers, I know the Hunger Games, that was when I heard about, was when working at Sport for Life, the archery clubs across the country were going, whoa, we just can't meet the demand, the increase. And so that was an awesome way to build awareness. But again, could clubs cope with that, the increased number? So how do you make your sport, how do you create curiosity that when people hear about it, see it, that they go, and I hear loud and clear Vanessa Lee's experience watching the Olympics, is, what dialed her in, what is it can be for other young girls. And then that what makes them aware, what are their first experiences like, is not the same thing which gets them coming back. That too requires another switch in gear. And how you retain them is often to do with how you progress them, how you build in competencies, again, around that envelope of sense of welcoming. And are they developing skills, not just the technical skills, not just the physical skills, but around their mental skills, their social and emotional skills, because this is a place where all skills are to be developed and progressed. I'll come back to that idea of mentorship as well, which is really valuable. And I know sometimes when people think about being a mentor, whether it's in the place of sport, whether it's in the workplace, people will just avoid it like the plague because they think, oh, I don't have time for this. There's a lot of things I have to do. And yet there are different kinds of mentors, especially with female athletes. Sometimes an athlete that is a little bit older is a wicked good mentor simply by the way she participates in sport. And so when you create environments where slightly younger participants are in the same place as the slightly older one, magical things will happen simply through observation and seeing what that slightly older participant is doing, what they are saying. And remarkable relationship building can occur from that as well. If you have a coach that believes in it, if you have a coach that thinks, well, this is just an efficient way for me to use space, then it might not happen. But if you have a coach there that actually supports conversation between slightly younger, slightly older, again, magical things can happen from that. So consider a broad range of roles for mentors as well. Some super, super simple, practical kinds of things is that when those participants come into your training place, are they welcomed? I'm not talking about putting out the red carpet and sprinkling red roses and so on around it, but do you recognize them? And basically it's a way of welcoming them and giving them the message that I'm glad you're here. You know, let's get on with learning something tonight, and let's get on with some joy. Another way that sort of builds in with the awareness piece as well is to create, you know, bring a buddy, bring a friend, someone who's never tried it. Create a special event where it's about bring a friend who's never tried this before. Now, I know with archery, there's going to be some issues and challenges around equipment needs. And so, as I say, I might be speaking, and I acknowledge not knowing the restraints around equipment. So that one, again, may fall short of being that reaching out and creating opportunities. And then Kathleen as well mentioned that getting to know your athlete participant as an entire person. Yes, they come to you because of your relationship with archery, and yet they're often bringing with them many of them are students. Many of them might have jobs on their own. And if they're burdened or if they're filled with joy about something, can your place be where they can be all of who they are, as well as performing the sport of archery? And it's not, again, being a sticky beak and, trying to find out way too much about their lives, but it becomes quite natural when you get to spend time with them. And the last one I wanted to pick up on, again, because Kathleen talked about risk. And we know from the sort of the broad scientific literature that women are often labeled as more fearful of taking risks compared to boys and men. And when that's put to the test in places of business, in education, and certainly in sport as well, that's an illusion that we believe in. And part of that is that girls and women have a drive for perfection. They want to do things right the first time. And if it cannot be guaranteed to be right, then they are less likely to even put their toe in the water and try. So I often encourage coaches that it really requires skill acquisition and building competency for those young girls and women. Do they feel ready to try these new challenges? And then it reduces the heat of that risk. And coaches, I often say a term about recognize and reward sensible risk-taking, specifically for girls. And that, again, when done in a very authentic, genuine fashion, then your athletes and your participants will trust you and they will believe your words. So that authenticity of relationship is also quite important. So I've gone on with tons of stuff there, but Kathleen lit the candle on that one, so I was going to jump on some of them. Thanks.
No, that's phenomenal. And both Vicki and Kathleen, it's a series of little actions that seem to contribute to a bigger culture of an entire club, and building in those infrastructures of, operating with the older girls and then the younger girls. And then that's how you create that legacy as well. So I think you did a really phenomenal job of outlining those, albeit a lot of them really have to do with that in-person social connection. So I know we are, rapidly running out of time, but I would love to hear from Vicki, Vanessa, Kathleen, anyone who can just offer a few tips for coaches right now operating during COVID, and anything that you're doing or that you've heard that's been really beneficial as far as, virtual engagement or with smaller groups. I'd love to be able to leave attendees with something that they can implement tomorrow.
Well, I mentioned it a little bit prior to Dr. Harber speaking. When COVID hits, because archery is really facility oriented and limited as soon as it gets cold, there are not as many facilities perhaps that can be open depending on what color zone you're in and how bad COVID is. So I'm not sure I should be saying this in a public space, but there are ways to train in your house, which if you have the right target butt and a webcam or a cell phone, we can design things. Right now, I have about 20 people that I work with this way, including in the United States. And we're trying to get our own little version of a male match going among all of us. So for Vicki, a male match is you don't have to be together. If the circumstances are similar, then you can compare scores, right? But we can turn it into something fun as well, and a time to get together, even if there's only a couple of us, but to share it. And I volunteered to organize it if we get that far, you know. So if you're at 3 meters, 5 meters, whatever, and that's all we've got because nobody's allowed at any of the clubs for the winter, it's going to be a really long winter. So we have to be a little creative here about getting around those kind of problems, especially in urban environments. Where I am, it's a little different, and I can control how many people are in the building. And also, I'm not just a club. So there are things that I can do because I'm a business as well. So in dealing with people who are in club situations with rented facilities for the indoor season, start to look at your options on the internet. Look at little places that you can get together as long as you've got a strong enough target butt and it's set up at the right level, it's parallel to the floor, and you keep your form. You know, you can turn that into something. Do little things together. Don't just look at circle faces all winter either. Keep something really spontaneous about it, but also a chance to get together. So the Zoom platform is really beneficial that way, and we're kind of looking at that. You know, 30 minutes on together. Let's go crazy. You know, so there are some things that we can do under these difficult or challenging times. Just like working with athletes with a disability, the only thing that's limiting you is your imagination. Go out there and experiment and go get it.
I just want to,
Kathleen. Oh yeah, go ahead, Vanessa.
Add on that. I think Kathy definitely talked about the technical skills where you can look at archers from you know, Zoom calls and things like that, but also we have an incredible opportunity to focus on the other aspects of archery, the fundamental skills like strength, also mental skills. Imagery training has proven to be almost more effective in creating accurate shots, just like they did a study with basketball shots. The people who did the imagery training, rather than, you probably know the study of the physical shots, they actually performed better in the end because they had strong mental skills. And lastly, what Vicki mentioned, now that I'm not shooting competitively anymore, somebody asks me what my favorite part of archery was, it wasn't shooting tens. It was the relationships I made. It was the skills that I learned, goal setting, persistence, all those things. Like Vicki, Dr. Vicki Harber mentioned, all skills are to be developed in progress. It's not just the physical skills. So learning from other archers and the social and emotional learning is so important in this time. And I think what better time to focus on these other skills, like imperative in archery as well.
Yeah. Phenomenal. I know we don't have a lot of time left. I'd love to get to one of the questions from the attendees. And I think this is a great one. Somebody, Adrian, said that there are inevitable plateaus in the progress and performance in archery. What tips do you have for supporting the sometimes fragile self-esteem of a teenager who's experiencing that?
Yeah. If I could add just a quick bit in that, awesome question, Adrian. And the idea that teenagers are at a point where it's a very peer-oriented context, and it's difficult for them to assess themselves in absence of those around them. And so one thing that works really well with young girls and youth is this entire process of goal setting. And when it is well done and followed up on, it becomes an incredibly individual journey. And you can instruct, inform, you can create a lot of self-awareness. You can touch on issues around emotional regulation, around some of those social emotional pieces that are often perhaps done quite by accident within sporting environments, but we're getting better now at becoming very deliberate at that. So the goal setting, that the athlete themselves identifies what is within reach and what are the kinds of things I would like to do to try and get there. And this also then provides the coach or the leader to identify, well, what's a suitable challenge? Is that a suitable step that this young athlete is asking for? And so you build that partnership through trust and the competencies then that go forward. And oftentimes that fragile self-esteem that you mentioned, all it needs is that regular bolstering of a trustworthy relationship. Is that when you become that person, when you become that place where their fears of not being good enough, their fears of not being valued can actually be addressed. And that again is kind of where this umbrella of a very safe place becomes part of that. So the idea of goal setting, you get the athlete to take the lead on it, to take responsibility for that over time. And even the youngest of the young, 6 and 7-year-olds can do smart goal setting for sure. And then as well around suitable, appropriate competitive challenges.
I'd like to build on what Dr. Harber just said. Certainly goal setting is critical. However, let's assess what we mean by plateaus and if that is only related to score. So in the sport of archery, as Vanessa Lee was saying, there are other aspects which we can get better at that do not have anything to do directly with how many times the arrow goes in the 10 ring in order to show we're better. Patterns in the target, matters of deviation of arrow patterns. How can I reduce those? Let's make this more of a challenge about consistency, because, you know, obviously consistency, the scores are going to go up. But is this plateau that you're referring to, and thank you for that question because it drives a lot of archers and archery coaches nuts, are we looking at the wrong end of the telescope to get past this? Has that person turned a goal into a barrier? Is the ceiling now closed because I keep trying to go someplace in the wrong direction? So there are a bunch of drills that you can do and make through with that plateau that takes the person's mind in a different direction on how they're actually addressing the sport. And psychologically, or whether that's physical strength, how many times in a row can I do this exact action? What am I looking for? Take them in a different place, and not just equipment. Take them in a different place of how they view their performance, because it is a very humbling sport. And for someone who's already a teenager, and as you say, they're pretty fragile, turn their brain into a different direction of how they're looking at their performance and add a little bit of novelty to how they are approaching that. Just till they get over it, they may realize that they were their own worst enemies, that they are actually, instead of looking at trying to hit it, they are looking at not missing it. And that creates a mental mindset that you can't get past that plateau.
That's incredibly valuable, and I've never known anyone in any sport to get out of a plateau with a poor attitude. So being that person to help them reframe that is huge. I've gotten the cue that we have time for one more question from the chat, and so I'd love to hear from Vanessa first on this. There are, a number of men who are attendees, which is great. And we can't have this conversation in the vacuum of, female coaches. And so I think it's really important that we address this one. How can we encourage young female athletes to bring forward their needs that are not shared by their male counterparts? And in brackets, this is, from the perspective of a male coach.
Sorry, my mute button was just covered. This is a tough question. It's really tough because I've lived through it myself. I think we have to ask, do girls really know what their needs may be? Bringing it back to my first international competition, I didn't know that I needed to be educated on maybe my own physiology and how it could affect my performance. So maybe education is key for women, so that we can have these open discussions, that we can form our own questions and we can form our own, bucket of needs. So I think that's where we need to start from. On top of that, I think we need to build less of this hyper-masculine culture in sport, where it's about how much weight is behind your bow, how stiff is your arrow. We need to break down this culture of competitiveness based on how much brute strength you have. When we can break that down, then maybe I think women can start feeling a little bit more comfortable bringing their needs forward and asking important questions to their coaches. I'd love to hear Vicki on this topic.
Yeah, and that is a big one that I will often hear from male coaches around how do they provide that safe environment for listening to the athlete voice. And this again, it connects right back to, are you a trusted adult in their life? And that trust doesn't emerge over one visit. So much of it is to do with your own consistency and the amount of time and attention that you put in to the training environment. And that idea about meeting athlete voice is that as you grow as a coach, the more that your athletes, male or female, will share some of those pieces with you. So Vanessa talked about, talking about her menstrual cycle. There are still male coaches that will shudder at the mention of that they'll go, oh, don't tell me I have to hear about this. This is none of my business. And yet that's what we're aiming to normalize, is that all that we bring in our physiology, in the people that we are, the more that we can understand that all of these things are going to influence how we train, how we learn, how we perform, and that we normalize this as conversation. And these then, all of these things that might be related or considered taboo, that we don't talk about them because it's a girl thing. And there's often awkwardness around that, is about having appropriate discussions. And again, these start at very young ages, around 5 and 6. For instance, girls will often have very squirrely ideas about their food intake and about not having a good relationship with food. And as a high performance athlete, they are a high performance engine. So how do they fuel that instead of getting wrapped up and feeling terribly restrained about what they eat? So these then can become opportunities for coaches to have child appropriate conversations about the foods that we eat and select to help us perform like a high performance engine. And then that growth and development of a girl as well, is that as the relationship continues, those conversations can be cultivated. And if there is a female counterpart, perhaps an older female athlete, or again, a mentor or an assistant, to be able to help with cultivating those kinds of conversations. But at some point, and this is where I think coach education and coach support, to me, that's what that looks like, is how do you cultivate these environments? I mean, what do they look like? What do they sound like? And as coaches, can we share with each other around, this is a conversation I tried, and man, you know, it went completely sideways. I didn't know what to say. Or other ones that saying, you know, this is the way I introduced it, and this, I just saw some light bulbs go on. And but it's a continuous process, and often reflective of the caliber of a relationship that one has between coach and athletes.
So I'd like to bounce off of that if there's enough time. In one of my former lives, I was responsible for training coaches through the certification program, and tandeming or getting involved with women that can help a man start to talk in acceptable ways is really part where this whole thing starts. So the question is extremely important. Men feel very intimidated at sometimes working with young women and girls, afraid they're going to say the wrong thing at the wrong time. And that's when, like Vicki is saying, pull somebody out of your club, pull another coach if you have a woman's coach, talk to the mom, say, I think there's something I should be doing better. Is there something that your daughter really relates to at home that I can start talking about with her, and then eventually we can get into more conversations, and she'll see that I'm interested in what I'm doing. Reach out to those other women, whether they're certified coaches or not, to start to build the bridges of communication, maybe indirectly, and then the young woman or child sees, oh man, he really found out something about me that, was really fun. Yeah, when I'm not shooting a bow, I skateboard, right? And it doesn't have to be about performance or menstrual cycles or anything else. It's about that conversation starter, as Vicki says, to build the trust that you're a trusted adult, so that when there is an issue, when we did instructor beginner, which used to be levels 1 and 2, getting male coaches to really talk and be firm about where a recurve string belongs on a woman's bust line would just about send some people into, nervous breakdown. But it has to be addressed. If you come across with the right words and very matter-of-factly, this is what's going to happen if you don't turn your body in the right direction, and my dear, it's not going to be pleasant. This is what you need to do. They go, oh, I get it. Okay, yeah, let's turn the body and get the string on the wrong side of the breast. Okay, those things, if you just try and step back, ask other people, or be very businesslike in how you approach topic, most young women and girls will respect that instead of coddling them or being soft and fuzzy about things. Just be very direct, businesslike, get to the details, and don't make any assumptions.
That phenomenal input from everybody on that one. I know we're already past time, and there are some really great questions that we unfortunately won't be able to get to. I feel like this conversation could just continue, and I really appreciate what everybody's had to say. Oh, Kyla's back. Hi, Kyla. I know I'm going to pass the mic over to Kyla, but thank you so much, everybody who stayed on the line and hung around with us and engaged. Thank you to all of the panelists and Archery Canada for having me lead this conversation. I am posting a link in the chat and just plugging a funding opportunity. Canadian Women in Sports WISE Fund is still live. Applications are open until Monday, November 9th, and this is a micro grant that can enable organizations, clubs, groups to advance gender equity in sport. So I'd highly encourage you to check that out. And yeah, thank you everybody once again. A really valuable conversation, and I will pass it over to Kyla.
Yeah, I just wanted to repeat what Vanessa said. Thanks everyone again for your time. This is, it is an important discussion. We're obviously not going to be able to, dent the surface in 1 hour and 15-minute panel. So I have taken note of the questions that we weren't able to get to. If anyone has any more questions, feel free to send them into the office. We would definitely like to continue this conversation and maybe schedule a further discussion in the coming months. So we'll keep those questions in mind, and I might be able to get some insight for you guys kind of in the lead up as well, and send them out kind of as I talk with the panelists. So don't hesitate to send in any questions to the office. I had put my email into the chat box. I'll put it in there again at the end, or you could also just send it to information@archerycanada.ca, and we will just archive them for a future discussion. As well as a reminder, we will be sending out a code for the Keeping Girls in Sport webinar. So keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, thanks again, everyone, and I hope you all have a great rest of your night.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody. Have a
Bye,
good
everyone.
evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good
Bye-bye.
night.